Hi folks. In March I read 11 of the 13 or 14 books that I had on my ambitious TBR pile, so there were a few that I didn't get to. As is now my habit, I'll give a brief recap of each one in the order that I read them, and then we'll tier rank them as we go, and I'll end with a declaration of my book of the month for March 2024. First up, I read Shards of Honor by Lois McMaster Bujold. I had a tough end to February, battling my way through The City and the Stars, which bored me half to death, and I wanted a palate cleanser, something light, a page turner, and Shards of Honor seemed like it would do the job for me. This is the first Vorkosigan book, chronologically anyway, the origin story, if you like. We meet Cordelia Naismith, who has been stranded on a disputed planet mid-survey after many of her team are shot in a confrontation with the Barrayan force, the leader of which is one Arel Vorkosigan, an honourable sort of chap, if rather staid and old-fashioned in his views. And there follows a gradual flowering of their relationship, and to be honest, it was a bit soft-focus, lovey-dovey for me. There were also a couple of sudden skip-forwards which weren't telegraphed very clearly. I was just left to figure it out, getting a page or two into the chapter before realising what was going on. In general, Shards of Honor was okay, but I fear not a great start to my Vorkosigan experience. I'm not put off for life or anything, but nor am I in any rush to return. 6 out of 10, a nebulous narrative. My next read was Hot House by Brian Aldiss, a classic of his early work. It's a fix-up of 5 novelettes which were originally serialised in magazine form. And in Hot House, we're in the far, far future. Earth has ceased rotating. The hemisphere facing the dying sun is covered in a lush forest, jam-packed with plant and vegetable life forms which have occupied every evolutionary niche previously occupied by us animals. The poor fauna, the likes of you and me and our pet cats, have been reduced to a few species, and humanity has shrunken to knee-height green-skinned creatures which are barely hanging on, literally, in the mid-layers of the trees. My favourite aspects of Hot House are the rich world building, both on the much-changed Earth and on the Moon. Aldous gives evocative, vivid descriptions. The plants are fierce and eager to take the unwary or merely unfortunate human, and we follow a small group of humans as they grapple with matters of survival and leadership. And I felt that the book didn't hang together perfectly. The joins were visible, and I liked some of the segments, the novelettes, better than others. The section involving a journey to the moon, for example, and the resulting transformation of the travellers into flymen and their subsequent journey back to Earth was the least strong, I thought, not to mention highly implausible. Having said that, I did like the notion of travelling up to the moon in a seed pod and back down inside the guts of a traverser plant. Overall, I enjoyed it, and the writing is, of course, excellent. So 8 out of 10 for me, a lush green, stellar splendour. Next, I read The Beastmaster by Andre Norton, and given her reputation as a writer, I had pretty high expectations, and honestly I thought it was a bit weak. Basically, it's cowboys and Indians transported to another planet that's conveniently like the Wild West. Hostine Storm is a Navajo man, a veteran and now a refugee from a devastated Earth, and he's settling on Arzor, the planet in question. He has a grudge against Brad Quaid and means to resolve that situation permanently. It's good writing, I suppose, but I didn't find it to be an engaging story, and I felt like I was forcing my way through it rather than being pulled along by the story. I did enjoy the interactions between Hostine and his telepathically linked menagerie and with his indigenous Norby friend, but overall I enjoyed it much less than I was expecting to. It's therefore a disappointing 5 out of 10 for me, a nebulous narrative. Next was Before Mars by Emma Newman, the third of a loosely connected Planetfall series, but the fourth one that I read, ably but accidentally demonstrating that they can be read in any order. Our protagonist is a Dr. Anna Kubrin, a geologist and accomplished artist, and Kubrin has just arrived on Mars after a lengthy solo journey from Earth. She meets her colleagues on the small science outpost, and almost immediately Anna finds a note stuffed down the back of her bed in her room. It warns her not to trust the base psychologist. Strange, but even more strange, the note is painted and in Anna's style. She's written the note to herself, she's certain of it. But how can this be? She's just arrived. This is the first of several unsettling events which cause Anna to become convinced that all is not as it seems. And meanwhile, her colleagues, particularly the psychologist, she who is not to be trusted, are worried that she's suffering from delusions from spending too much time in virtual reality immersives on the journey over to Mars. Anna is convinced that someone or something is deliberately deceiving the crew, and the book is really spent unravelling that mystery. We spend quite a bit of time in Anna's head as she wrestles with her feelings on leaving her family behind, particularly her complex feelings about her young daughter. And I think more time than I'd like was spent in her head like that, perhaps. At the end of the book, Newman kind of flips the plot table on us. There's a big reveal, more than one actually. I did enjoy this book, perhaps not as much as I enjoyed the first 2 books, Planetfall and After Atlas. So it's a solid 7 out of 10 for me, a planetary pleasure. Next was an EARC, an advanced reading copy of Sue Burke's Usurpation. Being a long now lapsed Kindle guy, I don't have one anymore. I had to read it on my phone, which isn't ideal. I'd have much preferred to read a physical copy, and when the time comes, I will get one. Usurpation is the third book in what is now the Semiosis trilogy. The first two were set on Pax, a colony world with a vibrant ecosystem where a small human community is busy establishing a foothold. They're aided in this by a stand of local flora they've named Stevland, a sentient rainbow bamboo. And the second book ends with some divisions of Stevland being sent to Earth with the secret objective from Stevland to protect and dominate the humans that they find there. The story of Usurpation is how Stevland's children achieve this. Much of the book is set in 29th century Europe, and things are quite different. A long-running civil war, the insurrection, has resulted in a severe balkanization of the continent, which is now full of microstates. The Pax Institute is in what used to be France, and Levanta, one of Stevland's offshoots, has connected herself to the internet and installed herself as the director of the institute. Meanwhile, an X factor in the conflict outside the institution's gates are the ubiquitous robots who seem to have their own agenda. Many of them have gone wild, behaving in unpredictable ways. And there's also a fair bit of Pax wildlife on Earth now, and rainbow bamboo is also widespread. I like the contrast of the chaos outside the Institute and the peace within, and I like the way that the stands of bamboo around the world cooperate to resolve the major threats facing humanity. And I also like the patient waiting for instructions from Pax, messages which take 110 years to make the round trip at light speed. In general, I was happy to be back in this world, albeit on a different planet this time. More on this to come nearer the publication date in October, but for now, a 7 out of 10 for me, a planetary pleasure. Next, I read Howling Dark by Christopher Rocchio, book 2 of the Sun Eater sequence. I really enjoyed the first one, and the second was even better, unputdownable for me. Howling Dark is, well, dark, is gothic, densely and richly detailed, confusing at times, but space opera through and through. 50 years have passed since the end of Empire of Silence, the first book, and much of it in cryosleep. We get some flashbacks or passing references to the events of those intervening years, 12 of which were spent awake, building the Red Company's reputation. Relationships have formed, and Hadrian is all loved up with the Amazonian Jinan, skipper of one of the 3 ships of the Red Company. They're seeking extrasolarians, people that live outside the Solon Empire, busy breaking taboos about body and gene modification. And it's thought that the extrasolarians may have knowledge in turn of the location of Vorgossos, legendary home of Khan Sagar, the oldest living being. Marlowe's ultimate goal in all of this is to make contact with the faction of the Cielcin and attempt to negotiate a peace to stop the Cielcin onslaught on the Empire. By this stage, almost 1,000 worlds have been destroyed and billions are dead. They are implacable and seemingly relentless foes. We meet a few Cielcin at the end of the first book, and since then, Hadrian and his witchy doctor friend Valka have learned the language. Talking of Valka, let's just say that I enjoyed how their relationship develops over the course of the book. It's been a slow burn since Empire of Silence, but better late than never. The final couple of 100 pages of Howling Dark cover negotiations with the Cielcin prince and his retinue, and I loved how alien they were in terms of their way of thinking, their use of language and their attitude to the humans who are mere animals or even vermin to them, and their casual cruelty. In fact, the very notion of negotiation is alien to the Cielcin. I really liked how Marlowe seems to act first and think later. He feels his way through situations, sometimes with devastating consequences. Overall, I loved it. It's top-notch space opera and very much my cup of tea. Let the tier ranking bells toll. I give Howling Dark 9.5 out of 10. It's a slam dunk galactic gem. Next was Richard Morgan's Market Forces, which I listened to on audiobook over a period of a few weeks. Market Forces is set in a nearish future London in which a series of domino recessions has knocked the wider economy into a slump. Most people live in the zones, wild, lawless slums fenced in, and the wealthy few live outside the zones. Chris Faulkner is one of those lucky few, although there is a price to pay. He works for Shawn Conflict Investments, a bank or financial institution with a difference. We get to see what conflict investment is and everything that surrounds it, but really that's the murky background music, the wallpaper to the main storyline, which is greed, personal ambition, backstabbing, and cars. Lots of cars. In this future, contracts and tenders are won and lost on the road, and corporate careers are built this way too, with challenges formerly offered via driver control. The weapons are armoured BMWs, Audis and Saabs, and the battlefields are the deserted motorways of London and its surrounding area. But these aren't races, they are battles to fiery or bullet-strewn death. There's a whole media ecosystem surrounding it, which is just as perverse. There's a complex web of personal relationships, friendships, and enmities, both overt and covert. And I think Richard Morgan does an excellent job painting the world. It's grubby, dangerous, dark, hopeless, violent, and cynical, all with a veneer of corporate respectability. I read and enjoyed Altered Carbon last year, a more famous book by the same author, but I think I enjoyed Market Forces even more. 8 out of 10 for me, a solid, stellar splendour. Next was Thorns by the science fiction legend that is Robert Silverberg. I've read 2 or 3 of his other books in the last year and I have enjoyed them, particularly A Time of Changes and Up the Line. And to my mind, at least from a story and character point of view, Thorns was not quite in their league. We're in the future of Duncan Chalk, a billionaire media mogul who gets his kicks from the misery of others. He has in mind a new TV reality show and he wants 2 stars for it. Mina Barris is a starman, a pilot who's recently returned from an expedition to an alien world where both he and his unfortunate crew were surgically improved, dramatically so, inside and out by the resident aliens, and he's the only survivor. He's now a freak and has become a hermit based on the consistently negative reaction of others. Lona Kelvin is a 17-year-old virgin mother of 100 babies, and she's been the guinea pig, not entirely willingly, of an experimental IVF process. But the babies have been given to others. She feels violated, depressed, and mourns the babies that she'll never see, and she's driven to repeated suicide attempts, only to be saved each time. Chalk sees Mina and Lona as ideal material for his show, and he has other, even less wholesome motivations, believing that they will inevitably be a disaster from a relationship point of view and will become even more angry and bitter than they already are. And that's all grist to the mill for an emotional vampire like Chalk. I didn't like the characters in this book much. I think maybe that was intentional. Mina was quick to anger and Lona was a bit whiny and needy. Their attempts at a relationship in full view of the world stutter and ultimately die in angry recriminations, exactly what Chalk expected and desired. I really like the ending of the book, and let's just say that Chalk gets what he deserves. And of course the writing was excellent. We're in Silverberg's purple patch, but the story didn't quite grab me. I think of the 4 of his books I've now read, this is my least favourite, but still, it comes in for me a 7 out of 10, planetary pleasure. The next book, The Furies by Keith Roberts, was an absolute joy. I do like a good catastrophe, and here we get a double disaster. There are giant carnivorous wasps, for starters, and then if that wasn't bad enough, there's a nuclear test gone wrong, which causes a global earthquake. Buildings collapse and the ground is torn asunder, all just making things even more difficult for those dealing with increasingly well-organised wasps, the Furies of the tale. There are 2 nicely drawn friendships between Bill Andrews, the protagonist, and Jane, the teenage but very forthright daughter of the big house up the road. And then later between Bill and Pete, a nickname for a streetwise former London prostitute. The wasps have taken over. Surviving humans have become their slave labourers, organised in camps to provide food for their waspy masters. But a hardy few are fighting back, scavenging for weapons and supplies in the dead towns, hiding in caves and attacking the wasps in their vast nests. Can they prevail? I liked Keith Roberts' writing, which was very much in the style of John Wyndham. It was clear, easy to follow, but very nicely done. And the story moved right along and I made short work of it. I have a few of Keith Roberts' books on my shelves now and I shall definitely be going back for more. 9 out of 10, a galactic gem. The Explorer by James Smythe was next. We're on a space mission sponsored by Pepsi and McDonald's, run by DARPA for shadowy reasons. The mission is televised, recorded, blogged and vlogged up the wazoo for an eager audience back on Earth. And it seems like the crew have been chosen, at least partly based on how photogenic they are rather than on mere competence. Cormac Easton is the protagonist, a journalist by trade, and he's on the mission to document it and send it back to Earth. He's gone through the same training in theory as the others, kind of, but is essentially incompetent in comparison to the rest of the crew. And as described on the rear cover of the book, things quickly go wrong and the crew die one by one in varied, often unexplained circumstances, and Cormac is soon alone, accompanied only by the dead in their sleep capsules. The mission is mostly automated and Cormac watches the timer count down to the turnaround point, but when that comes, the Ishiguro, the ship, just keeps going. Cormac loses the plot and part 1 ends explosively. Just as you're thinking, well, where do we go from here? The book continues in Groundhog Day fashion. Cormac is obliged to relive his time on the Ishiguro. Why or how, we don't know, or at least not yet. He hides in the lining of the ship, observing the crew, including himself. Yes, there are now 2 Cormacs. Through recursive Cormac and his convenient vantage point, we get to see events in more detail, gathering clues along the way. How exactly did the crew die? Were they really accidents? What is the real purpose of the mission? What are the motivations of the rest of the crew? We also get some flashbacks to the selection process and to Cormac's slow-motion marriage breakdown and worse that follows. This was my first James Smythe book, and I liked it. It didn't blow my socks off, but it was good. I'm curious to know what happens next. I liked the recursive elements of the plot, and I enjoyed the gradual reveal of the details we weren't privy to on the first go-around. 7 out of 10 then, another planetary pleasure. The last book that I read in March was Harry Harrison's Make Room, Make Room. Set in the late 90s in a New York City stuffed to the gills with 35 million people. Our protagonist is Detective Andy Rush. Billy Chung is a child of Taiwanese refugees, and under cover of a riot involving striking Elsters, Billy steals some Soylent steaks. A rare luxury, eating some and selling the rest for the deposit required to become a telegram boy. Delivering his first telegram to mobster Big Mike O'Brien, he catches a glimpse of Shirl, Mike's live-in floozy, his gangster's mole. Billy is smitten on the spot and resolves to break in later on to meet her properly, maybe steal some stuff while he's there. Unfortunately for Billy, he's caught in the act by Big Mike and there's a tussle that results in Big Mike's death. From this point on, Billy is on the run and Andy is assigned to the case, and he develops a bit of a crush on the beautiful Shirl, and together they live it up on Mike's dollar until she gets booted out of his apartment. The relationship is nicely done, I thought, as was the friendship between Andy and Sol, the older guy who shares their tiny apartment space. I also enjoyed the depiction of an overcrowded world. Harrison imagined an economy on its uppers, fresh water and food production unable to cope with demand, and teeming millions crowding the whole planet. It hasn't come to pass quite in that way, but it was a common assumption back in the day when Harrison wrote the book. It's another 7 out of 10 for me, a planetary pleasure. With all of that said, I can declare that my book of the month for March 2024 is Howling Dark by Christopher Rocchio. Although that was given a good run for its money by The Giant Wasps of the Furies by Keith Roberts. What were your favourite reads this last month? Do let me know, I'm always keen to hear about a good book recommendation. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye for now.